What's going on, everyone? So today we got to talk about some new cards. I know I've been saying that, well, I'll kind of just go over cards when we have a decent chunk of them to talk about. In the last couple of weeks, we've had big streams revealing, 10 plus cards at a single time. And that's, in my opinion, worth a video. But over the past few days, it's slowed down a little bit. Although today we've got, 15, 16 brand new cards to talk about. So we're going to walk through them and I'm going to give my opinions, which is going to be really fun. Before we do, big thank you to my patrons over on Patreon. I got some games in with some of you over the weekend, which was really fun, as well as, well, I have a TCG player link in the description down below. Be sure to check that out if you want to pick up any of the cards that we'll talk about today for set 3 or any other cards, period, in Star Wars Unlimited. But we got to dive into some cards and immediately start talking about them, starting us off with Equalize, okay? Equalize, a 3-cost event in double vigilance. Give a unit -2/-2 for this phase, and if you control fewer units than that unit's controller, give another unit -2/-2 for this phase. Now, first thing with this card, because I know a lot of people will have questions about this, you cannot give the same unit -4/-4, which is really important, because if you could, that would make this card significantly stronger than we already see here, okay? Because that would mean that any control deck would be running this if you're double vigilance. So double vigilance Rays, double vigilance Idens, any other double vigilance type deck, a -4/-4 removal is really powerful. This is -2/-2 for 2 separate units. And of course, one of the big things that this is considering is like clone trooper tokens, battle droid tokens, going to be able to go and give 2 things -2/-2. And if you are fighting those styles of decks, then giving -2/-2 to 2 separate things is going to be very likely. But if you think about just like what double vigilance is trying to do, you are very likely to have less units than your opponents on average if you're playing a double vigilance deck. So it's not unlikely for you to get the 2 modes. And let's say your opponent's just playing a standard, like let's just look at the standard decks right now, kind of in the meta. Is giving 2 separate units -2/-2 okay, or good enough? And if I'm thinking about this, and I compare this to like Make an Opening, which is the 3-cost event that gives -2/-2, but also heals some. If you're able to play Make an Opening and you find that that card's been pretty good for you, I would wager to say that Equalize is probably going to be also pretty decent. I think Make an Opening, at least in the current iteration of the meta, might actually be a little bit stronger than Equalize just because of the heal. And that's going to be a little bit more relevant. Not to mention that Make an Opening is single vigilance, which is also extremely important for a lot of decks, as most of them are not running double vigilance. But coming next set, this could have a lot of targets. If you just think about like Batch Brothers, for example, this essentially would potentially kill 2 separate units. Now, I will note, the other thing that I want to specify with this card is, let's say someone does play a Batch Brothers and you have a single unit on the battlefield, you will not be able to give 2 things -2/-2. Because it says give a unit -2/-2 for this phase, then if you control fewer units. So it's kind of considering that, okay, you need to have essentially 2 less units than your opponent, because you will kill something and then give another -2/-2 if you meet the conditions. So it's a little bit more tricky than it looks, but I do think this has a lot of potential in set 3, or with set 3, assuming we have a double vigilance deck. That's what I really need to see, because this, for 5 resources, you could play like Bombing Run, right? Or like you could be playing like well, another card that we're going to talk about if you're trying to deal tokens, for example, or give things -2 toughness. Next up, we got Admiral Ulen, a 3-cost ground unit in Heroism Command. 2/5 Republic official, kind of a meh stat line. 2/5s are pretty weak, are on the weaker side. However, he has Restore 1, which is okay, and he gives each other friendly heroism unit +0/+1. So very interesting card, because if you look at this at face value, we've played 3 resource 3/5s, like Cassian, for example. Granted, that has extra value later on in the game. But, we've played 3 resource 3/4s with some extra upside. This is not too far off from a stat line that I'd be okay with. It is a little bit weaker than that, and it is a good chunk weaker, because 2 power versus 3 power is a big difference in the early stages of the game. There's a lot of 3 toughness turn 1 plays that this cannot kill. And that's a little bit of a thing to consider. The Restore 1 is useful. The question is this friendly unit getting, or friendly heroism units getting +1 or +0/+1 actually relevant? And if I'm thinking about this, let's say you go like turn 1 Battlefield Marine, turn 2 Ulen. Now you have a 3-4 Battlefield Marine, and that Battlefield Marine could potentially kill their turn 1 play and stick around to deal damage or kill another thing. So that could be useful. It also, if you are playing a tokens deck, could pump up all your Clone Trooper tokens with +0/+1, I believe. I'm just thinking, I don't remember if they actually have the heroism tag now that I think about it. I believe they have the heroism tag. But I'm just going to pull open the card list and see if it actually has the heroism tag before I continue on that train of thought. It does. So oh my gosh, I was trying to pull up the tokens, but it doesn't actually pull open. So pumping up your Clone Trooper tokens could potentially be interesting. And if you look here, it does have the, oh my gosh, heroism tag. I just clicked on it, but it has the heroism tag, so that's useful. I don't know if that's good enough is the problem. The thing that I'm more excited about is like pumping up a turn 1 play to kill something and then keep it around to potentially kill a second thing. I'm a little bit hesitant on this card. We've seen like General Dodonna do some work, but this one's much more expansive. I guess Red 3 is a little bit more of an interesting comparison because it applies to all heroism units. Red 3 has been very good, but that's because it's been in aggro decks. And honestly, I say it's been very good. It's more of just like a curve staple. In some situations, it's been very good, but honestly, it's been kind of like just there. If we get a better 3-resource play in space, that, you know, maybe has like a 3/3 stat line and gives like some other minor thing, I could see playing that over Red 3, because Red 3, at least in the current iteration, doesn't actually go ahead and do a whole lot in terms of pumping up your damage. I'm not convinced by this card, but we will see. Again, the best case scenario I see with this is like play a Battlefield Marine, play this, kill your opponent's Battlefield Marine, and then have that Battlefield Marine stick around even after that, and they have to deal with Ulen in order to kill a Battlefield Marine, which would be pretty relevant. Next up, we got a couple of Clone Troopers to talk about. These are very basic units, not much to say. We have a Phase 1 Clone Trooper, 2-cost ground unit, heroism, 3/2, and has the Republic Clone and Trooper tags. And we get Phase 2 Clone Trooper, which, by the way, love the designs or the art on these cards. Love seeing the different phases of Clone Troopers in card form. This is just a 3-cost ground unit, heroism, 3/2 stat line, Republic Clone Trooper with ambush. So essentially the same card, except the Phase 2 Clone Trooper costs 1 more and you get ambush as a result. These don't look that impressive, especially the Phase 2 Clone Trooper. Yes, it has ambush. Yes, we've seen some play of like, oh my gosh, I'm forgetting the name, but the 2-cost 3/1 ground unit that has ambush as kind of like a removal. This one's 3-cost, which is a huge downside. But I could see some play with Phase 1 Clone Trooper as it being a 2-cost ground unit with the Republic Clone and Trooper tags. Despite it being a 3/2, just having those tags could be relevant enough to where you're playing it in your deck with your Clone Trooper tokens. I could definitely see that. I don't see Phase 2 Clone Trooper being all that relevant. The one exception to that is if we do get some sort of like double Vigilance Obi-Wan deck with Phase 2 Clone Trooper and we're using it as a removal and you're playing like things like Equalize and you're trying to control the game, or you see like a Ray deck and you want to use this as a removal. That's the only time I can see this being somewhat useful, but at least, again, if I were to write this in the current iteration of the game, I would not be happy about it. Next up, we have the new Vigilance base, and we've gotten almost all of them. I believe the last one we're waiting for is the Aggression base. This is a 26 health base in Pow City, which makes me think that we're going to get a 24 HP Aggression base, since we have 26 HP for the Cunning and 26 HP for the Vigilance. Each leader unit you control gets +0/+1. So the Cunning one, each leader unit you control gets +1/+0. The Commander one makes it so that you can deploy 2 Battle Droid tokens when you deploy your leader. Aggression one is not known yet, as far as I remember. This seems almost unplayable, to be honest. I know some people are like, oh, maybe you could do something cool with it. If I'm thinking about what decks play a Vigilance base at the current moment in the game, I'm thinking like maybe Hondo Blue. Kira is Kira Green, so that doesn't even account. Bosk Blue, maybe. None of these decks wants to trade off the 4 HP in order for you to give up a leader unit +0/+1. Ray Blue, is something that I've heard, and people are like, oh, well, you could like ECL, or if they ECL Poe down Ran, it doesn't kill Ray, but it does because they can just discard a card to kill Ray with the Poe attack. And yes, they have to discard another card, but that's not really a big downside. So I just don't really see how this puts someone in range, or I should say out of range of whatever thing that they're looking to avoid in decks that matter, because Vigilance base is the least likely base to trade off HP on your base for some sort of something. Again, most of the time, Vigilance decks are going to be a little bit more on the controlling side, so you really do want that extra HP. So to me, this looks way worse than even the other two. The one that I'm most excited about still is the Cunning one, and that's because most of those Cunning decks are looking to be a little bit more aggressive, and I could see getting an extra power on your leader mattering, especially in, like, again, Sabine yellow, in Boba yellow, in Han yellow. These are decks that really do want to get in damage. I've seen some conversation about, okay, maybe you play this in like Chirrut double blue, but that doesn't seem very good. You could play it in like Sabine blue to get her out of takedown range. I've seen that a couple times, but Sabine blue is not a very good deck. And even if you are able to get it out of takedown range, it's not like that's going to be incredibly relevant all the time. Is that worth the 4 HP loss? Probably not. Maybe in Sabine blue because you're trying to be aggressive, I would think. Maybe there's some sort of Mandalorian red-blue Sabine deck. I don't know. I don't see this as being a very playable base. Kind of like Security Complex. Isn't really being played most of the time. But let me know what you think about this one. These are the most impactful cards, I'd say. Generally, bases, because it applies to literally every deck in terms of how you want to construct that deck. Next up, though, we have a new upgrade. 2-cost upgrade, double aggression, twice the pride. One play, deal 2 damage to attached unit, and it gets +4/+0. Pretty simple, but very interesting. Remember, this is not a non-vehicle unit. Every upgrade that makes you only attach to ground units or non-vehicle units will say so. So you could attach this to vehicle units. And I'm just thinking, like, let's say you're playing a double aggression deck, and you can't play like Millennium Falcon, for example. But let's say you're playing, I don't know, like an A-Wing on turn 1. And turn 2, you play twice the pride on an A-Wing. Boom. Suddenly, you're attacking for 7 points of damage in the air. I could see potentially having a double aggression deck where this card could get some value. It depends on the meta, of course. And that 2 damage to attach unit could matter, especially for ground units. And that's why I said space units, because in ground, your opponent probably will just be able to trade with it. And then they kill your unit and kill your upgrade, which could probably consume less resources than what they spent on their unit. So you'll have to be in the right matchup, because things like Daring Ray, Takedown, Power of the Dark Side are still prevalent and still could mess up your strategy. So you need to make sure you're not in that matchup. You also need to make sure that it's in some sort of an evasive unit, so you might be able to get at least an attack, but maybe 2. And then I could see some value for this. That's a lot of prerequisites. But would I play this in a deck currently? Probably. I'd probably play it in like double red new Han. I think that this could get some value there, where you're playing just a lot of units every single turn. Your units already have damage on them, so you wouldn't mind putting another upgrade on them and are getting some value there. Or heck, if you're playing like double red Sabine, just putting this on a Sabine leader is a lot of damage, right? That's an extra 4 points of damage, and using this as like a 2 resource 4 burn spell or burn event or I guess you say burn upgrade in Sabine could potentially be good enough, right? Double red Sabine, you deploy Sabine, you get this on Sabine, because that's like usually the last thing you do during that turn, and just getting in for 4 points of damage is really relevant. So I think this could get some play. I'm not saying that it's going to be like a full 3 of. I could see this being because of 1 or 2 of, kind of like heroic resolve, but I'm not insanely excited. I just think it could get some play. Next up, though, we got a brand new leader, and that is Mace Windu Vapad Form Master. Guys, I am so excited for this guy. Sweet art, absolutely sweet character. He's got an action, pay 1 resource, exhaust Mace Windu leader, deal 1 damage to a damaged enemy unit. Then if it has 5 or more damage on it, deal an additional damage to it. Pretty sweet, pretty interesting action. On the flip side, we have 7 to flip. He's also aggression heroism, by the way. 5/8 Force Jedi Republic. When deployed, deal 2 damage to each damaged enemy unit. Pretty straightforward. For those of you that don't know anything about Mace Windu, the whole idea behind his form is trying to identify weaknesses within your enemy and then exploit them. So the theme of the leader makes so much sense. He's identifying the weak units on the battlefield, and then he's able to deal some damage to them. It's really sweet. The question is, how relevant is this action? Is the 7 to flip too much? And how relevant is the when deployed and stat line? So first, I'll start off with the flip side. 7 to flip leaders have been notoriously kind of weak. Okay, they've been pretty bad for the most part. The exception to that has really been Darth Vader. And even so, Darth Vader was really only extremely solid in set 1. And that's only with the Vader blue for the most part. There was a little bit of Vader green. With set 2, he's dropped off a little bit. I still think Vader green is still pretty good, but the 7 leader portion of it actually makes him just a lot weaker. For example, there is Bosk blue now, and I think that deck is way better than Vader blue just because your leader comes down sooner. So if you're playing a control strategy, it doesn't work as well. Now, I'm not saying that you want to play control strategy with Mace Windu. You probably lean a little bit more aggressive because you're trying to deal some damage to enemy units to get value out of his frontside ability. But even so, if you're playing an aggressive deck, you don't want to be deploying so late because you might get outvalued at that point. 5-8 is not a bad stat line. It's usually what we see for 7 to flip leaders. I'm just not that impressed with that portion of it. The deal 2 damage to each damaged enemy units, also not that impressive either. I do think this kind of has to do with, the clone troopers that you have, right? People might be attacking your clone troopers and then have only a certain amount of damage on them because they're super small, and maybe you get some value out of it. I'm not super impressed by his when deployed ability, and that leads me to his front side. While I do think it's a really sweet card, I don't think it's all that great. If you're thinking about kind of what you want to be doing, spending one action to deal a single damage to some units on the enemy side of the battlefield, assuming you've already dealt damage to them, is not relevant most of the time. Sometimes it can be, but it still costs you a resource. Against like New Han, yeah, I could see this doing some work in that matchup for sure, but you're not going to be playing against New Han every single game. So outside of that matchup, I just don't see how often you're really going to be able to use this action, and even when you want to, because again, it costs one resource. If this was a free action, I would say that this is a lot better, and I would be a lot more kind of interested in this, but you want to be curving out, usually, if you're playing aggression heroism, and that's the other part of it, is if you're playing aggression heroism, don't you just play Sabine, or Ahsoka, or one of these other heroism aggressive leaders? Probably, but we will see. Sweet card, absolutely amazing flavor, but I just don't think it's that strong. Pretty average to below average for me. On other notes, we have Mace Windu's lightsaber, which is pretty cool. This is a new upgrade, 2-cost upgrade in aggression heroism, same thing as the Mace Windu leader. We have an attached to non-vehicle upgrade, and when played, if the unit is Mace Windu, you draw 2 cards, and it gives +2/+2. So 2-cost upgrade that gives +2/+2. That's kind of the going rate for stats. Like usually you want to get as many points of stats as you are, basically like double what the cost you paid for it is. So for example, if you look at Jedi lightsaber, it's 3 costs, you get 6 points of stats. Mace Windu's lightsaber, you get 4 points of stats. If you look at Ruthlessness, you get 2 points of stats, 2 power, 0 toughness. If you look at what's another one? Darksaber, you get 7 points of stats for 4 costs, but it also has another ability. So you kind of want to be in that range in order to make it a playable upgrade. However, this when played ability is only relevant, at least at the current moment, for the Mace Windu unit and leader, which comes down on 7 resources. It's very unlikely that you'll be able to attach it to a Mace Windu. And if that's the case, you're just getting a 2 resource upgrade that's attached to a non-vehicle unit that gets +2/+2. That's basically academy training, which is a common for those who are maybe uncommon. It's like draft chaff from your packs. For those of you that haven't played with it, I have played with it in draft. It's just not that great, okay? I don't see this card being good pretty much at all. And even if you do attach it to Mace Windu, drawing 2 isn't really going to pull you out most of the time at that stage, if that's what you're like playing it for. It's a nice piece of value, but I just don't see this really giving you all that much 90% of the time, except for an academy training, which we again have seen be pretty weak. Next up, though, we got some cards that were revealed a few days ago, or a couple days ago, not even a few days, just a couple days ago. 6-cost ground unit Kit Fisto in Just Aggression. It's a 7/6. Force, Jedi, Republic are the tags. It's got Saboteur and Coordinate. Coordinate on attack. You may deal 3 damage to a ground unit, period. That's it. So this seems pretty interesting. First off, you can ECL this guy. So the first thing I think of whenever I see a 6-cost ground unit, or 6-cost unit in general, but especially ground unit, I'm like, oh, I can ECL this guy. And it is an aggression, so it could go in like Sabine Green, for example. The thing is, Saboteur doesn't usually do a whole lot at this stage in the game. It can have some nice value. The 7/6 stat line is okay. It's not amazing. The thing about Wrecker that makes him so powerful is that when you ECL him out, because of the overwhelm, despite the 7/6 stat line and the 5 damage on attack, or when he's deployed, you will be able to overwhelm a ton, which is why he's strong. Kit Fisto doesn't really do any of that. You do get the on attack trigger if you do happen to have 2 other units on the battlefield when you do play this guy and are able to attack with him, whether it's ECL or whether you just play with him or play him and then attack afterwards. But that 3 damage is just that. It's just 3 damage, and that's not good enough usually. I will say this card looks intriguing. It does have the Force, Jedi, Republic tags, which are relevant. All of them are relevant. The 7/6 stat line, again, is decent. It's not insane, but it's decent. I don't think Saboteur is all that relevant, but if you're able to trigger the coordinates frequently, maybe the ability to remove some other tokens or some things to go wide from your opponent could be relevant enough where you want to play Kit Fisto as sort of an option to finish. Also, you can kill things like Crate Dragon with this, right? Because you can deal 3 damage to Crate Dragon and then attack it with Kit Fisto. Or attack it with Kit Fisto and then deal 3 damage to it. So you get 10 damage total, which is kind of interesting. You could split the damage up, as I said earlier, kill a battle droid token and hit their base, or hit another battle droid token, which could be interesting. I'm open to this card. I just think it has a lot to kind of set up, right? 2 other units. You have to get to 6 resources, and you have to be able to attack with it. But maybe I could see some potential with this. I'm just not super impressed by it. Seems decent to me. And I believe this is the last card. Nope, there's one more. We have Bloodsport. My oh my, guys. I've been talking about Bombing Run. I think this card, I think there's a lot of hate for tokens already, and I'm a little bit worried about it, which is why I think Set 3's mechanics might fall short in some cases. This is a 3-cost event in Just Aggression, and it just says deal 2 damage to each ground unit. That kills Clone Trooper tokens, that kills Battle Droid tokens, it also kills any other small units or finishes off units that have some damage on them already. Now, this to me, unlike Bombing Run, potentially seems more of a sideboard card. Bombing Run could still hit some other things in space. If you do have some space units, it could also hit some ground units as well on top of just tokens, and it will more frequently be able to do so. Whereas Bloodsport, 2 damage is almost always just tokens for the most part. There are some decks that do have like Greedos and such that it could hit, but if it's not dead already, then you could just trade it with a unit or do something that's more universally good than Bloodsport or Power of the Dark Side or whatever. But this again seems like a pure sideboard card against the token decks. If someone's playing Battle Droid tokens, put 3 copies of this in your sideboard, and boom, you bring them in, and you completely wreck your opponent's strategy. Heck, it's on turn. The thing that makes it so strong is it's turn 2. Your opponent plays something on turn 1. Let's say they have initiative. Turn 2, they play something, and you just go Bloodsport and knock out their entire board. It's insanely strong. If they go like turn 1, play 2 things. Turn 2, play Batch Brothers. Boom, you Bloodsport. Suddenly, all their coordinate options are gone. It is insane. They play like Echo to get +2/+2 in order to attack after they play Batch Brothers. Boom, it wipes out 3 units on the battlefield. That card seems pretty good. So I think this is much more of a sideboard option. And I'm a little bit worried at how many hate cards we have for tokens already. And granted that I think it's safe to print them for the most part. for the most part. There are some situations where there may be too many good sideboard options or too many good main deckable options, which again, I don't think this is really main deckable because 2 damage is a little bit too niche, especially with each ground unit, that it might just push these mechanics out of the meta entirely. But the last card we got to talk about is the Elite P-38 Starfighter space unit for 3 resources and Cunning Villainy. It's a 3/2 Separatist vehicle and fighter, and when played and when defeated, you may deal 1 damage to a unit. Pretty straightforward. I think this card could potentially have some big use. Again, the Separatist tag seems to be in high demand. It's a nice evasive unit in space for the most part. It is evasive. I know there's a lot more space units now, so that might change, but generally speaking, most decks are going to be split, you know, like 70-30 space, ground space. So getting this guy down is pretty nice. It's also nice because when you play it, it deals 1 damage to a unit, so it can knock off, you know, any ground unit or space unit that has 1 toughness. So that's kind of nice. It also can trade into 3/4s pretty nicely because it just trades straight up and can do something, a damage to another unit. If you're fighting against a 2 toughness unit, you can play this, deal 1 damage to it, attack another thing, trade with that, deal another damage to that 1 toughness unit now that you've dealt 1 damage to, which is kind of interesting. I think this card is very playable if the Separatist tag needs this type of card. And it's very possible they need it. I would have loved to see, not that it would make sense to have the droid tag, but if it did have the droid tag, I could see this being even more powerful because there's a lot of specific droid synergies in Cunning Villainy, especially. Heck, General Grievous itself wants to be, have droid options as well. So I think there's some potential with this card. Seems a little bit plain, but could have some really, really nice options in a Separatist themed deck. But that's going to wrap up all the cards we have to talk about today. I know there was a lot of them. I think the card I'm most excited about, or maybe most confused or looking to see potential for, Equalize and Admiral Ulen. Those are the ones that I'm waiting to see and might have the most potential, but are probably the hardest to rate. Mainly because Equalize, it needs a double Vigilance deck, and we haven't really seen a Vigilance leader that would make that happen, because that's what you need. And then Ulen here, well, this one's going to be really hard to evaluate until we start playing with it, because this extra toughness bump could matter depending on what people are playing. Like, if they're playing Blood Sports and you want to keep all your Clone Trooper tokens, well, suddenly Ulen gives that ability to do so, and maybe that's just enough. Maybe that's just enough so you can get to your leader, coordinate out something, or coordinate out some sort of unit to get some sort of trigger or whatever. I have no idea. But Ulen is one of those cards where I think we'll have to play with a decent chunk to determine whether or not this card is actually pretty good. I could see this being good. I can also see it being pretty mediocre. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Thanks for watching, everyone, and I'll see you all for the next one.